how the Georgia Bulldogs in 2024 are going to completely flip the script from what happened in 2023. What do we know about the Georgia Bulldogs in 2023? Well, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, like most teams, they have a fairly young roster thanks to things like the transfer portal and routine graduation. And what that means is you have a lot of young players, freshmen and sophomores, that are going to be counted on to carry heavy loads when you're actually playing football games. When we look back at the 2023 season, not only did they have a young roster where more than 50% of the roster was underclassmen, freshmen and sophomores, but for the first time, well, not the first time, but maybe more so than in recent years, the injury bug was a real issue for Georgia throughout the course of the 2023 season, but especially in the first half of the season. The numbers are going to tell us one thing, but think about the mood among Dog Nation. Think about the mood you had when you sat down to watch Georgia play. Was it one of trepidation? Was it one of unfulfillment? Was it one of longing? Like, yeah, they're really good, but they just aren't quite the same. And there were a lot of things that were talked about as to why that was the case. Here on this channel, we did our best to lay it out for you that it was, in fact, a combination of things that may have left you feeling that way. They weren't blowing people out big enough. They were slow to get started on offense. They didn't quite look as smooth or as polished as they had looked in the years past, especially the year prior. And I was sitting here telling you, again, there are a lot of reasons for that. You got a lot of young faces playing. You've got a new quarterback that hasn't taken a live snap in 4 seasons. You have injuries, so you don't have your full, handle on what your offense can be. Now, over the course of the season, we saw those things shift and move and improve. The injuries stayed a consistent thing throughout the year. It was just varying on who it was that was in or out of the lineup that week. But regardless, Coach Mike Bobo did a wonderful job, according to Kirby Smart, in using the pieces that he had available to put an offense on the field that kept the Dogs undefeated through that first half of the season and also kept them right on par with the offenses from the last 2 seasons prior to 2023. In some instances, they were better. The bottom line was the Georgia offense, the first half of 2023, was every bit as efficient and productive as the offense was in 22, and in some cases better than it was in 21. Expand your viewpoint a little bit and look into the back half of the season. What did we see there? Again, injuries were a consistent thing throughout 2023, but in the back half of the season, in spite of those injuries, we saw Carson Beck really begin to find his stride. We saw that the offense became not less productive, not less explosive when they got into what most people considered to be the meat of their schedule, but more productive and more explosive. That is the point that I really want to drill down on as we head into 2024. How is Georgia going to flip the script on the 2023 season as we move into 2024? And to put it quite simply, it all comes down to one thing. That would be the return of Carson Beck to lead the Bulldogs offense. I don't think you can overstate how important it's going to be that number 15 is back under center for Georgia here in 2024. When we saw Georgia win their national championships, we saw a model a little familiar. Think about it. In hindsight, we might look at Stetson Bennett and say he was phenomenal all the time, but the truth is he wasn't. In 2021, Stetson made some plays along the way, but he also put the Dogs behind the 8 ball in more than one occasion, taking chances because that was the kind of game that he played. But at the bottom line about that 21 team is that they had a generational defense, unquestionably. If you wanted to make the argument, you could, that 21 defense is one of, if not the best collegiate football defenses in the history of the sport. Now, I'm not prepared to make that argument today, but I know you can. Maybe we'll get to that down the road. The 21 defense was so good, as evidenced by how many people they wound up putting in the first round of the following NFL draft, that all Stetson Bennett and that offense had to do was be able to make a play when they had to. They didn't have to roll up big numbers. They didn't have to lead the country in offense. They simply needed to score more than the other team. And with that 21 defense over there, that wasn't that hard to do because they only gave up somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 points per game that year. Then look at 22. The defense was not as good as 21 because you can't be. You can be really good and not be generational. There were always places on that 22 defense that you could point to. Maybe it was pass rush. Maybe it was something along the lines of one-on-one corner play or something like that. You could nitpick that defense. But the bottom line was it was not as good statistically as the 21 unit. However, unlike in 21, the 22 offense was vastly more explosive. And if that defense in 22 gave up a play here or there, you could always trust that Stetson Bennett and Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington, that they were going to get the job done when it came to scoring enough points to overcome any spots that the defense might have had in any certain game. So you can see in 21 to 22, both teams national champions, but they sort of inverted the way they had played the year before. That's where we get to 2023 and 2024. Now, clearly, I'm not stating that the 23 team would be the point-by-point equal to the 21 team. The 21 team was a national champion. But when you look at the trajectory of the season, the first half of the year, the offense was the one that was starting slow, and the defense had to carry them along, cover their bases, until they got to the back half of the season, where now we have more injuries on the defensive side of the ball, and you're having to play younger players that don't have the experience. So therefore, maybe you're not going to be quite as good as you were early in the year on defense. That was the point where the Georgia offense was hitting its stride to carry the team down the stretch. It was Carson Beck on the highlight reel. It was Kendall Milton on the highlight reel. It was Dylan Bell. It was Marcus Rosemy Saint. Those were the guys that were making plays down the stretch to get the W's for Georgia and help cover any inadequacies that the defense may have been dealing with at that time. So inside the 23 season, that's what you had. And it resulted in a very good year for Georgia. Just not a championship year. Well, here in 2024, I think what we're going to see is probably going to be the inverted version of what we saw in 2023. So Carson Beck is back under center for the Georgia Bulldogs here in 2024. And like the thumbnail promised you, Georgia had an offensive, some would say, juggernaut in 2023. Carson Beck piloted an offense called by Mike Bobo that was a record-setting unit in the history of Georgia football in 2023. On an individual level, Carson was the guy who set new records for completion percentage over the course of the season, who led an offense that set records for third down conversion percentage over the course of the season. Carson, in his first year starting, in both terms of touchdowns thrown for and yards passed for, Carson set records at the University of Georgia and wound up keeping himself, once we got down to the end of the season, right there in the top 5 nationally among the top quarterbacks in the country. Whether it was the Heisman Trophy winner at LSU or the quarterback out in Washington, Carson did everything he needed to do to guide Georgia in 2023 because he had found his stride. He had, along with the offense, figured out and found their comfort zone as they moved over the back half of the season. When we look at 2024, I think the key to Georgia's success, especially given the new schedule and the way they're going to be tested early, is going to be for Mike Bobo to trust his weapons, which the Dogs have loaded up on, and let that sports car run. That's what Carson Beck is going to have his hands on here in 2024. They did wonderful things in 2023, but keep in mind, that was his first year starting in 4 seasons. Keep in mind that Coach Mike Bobo was a first-year offensive coordinator back in this system, and everyone was trying to meld everything together. Allow yourself to remember what Stetson Bennett did in his second year as the starter in Todd Monken's system. It was Monken's third year calling plays in that system, which we can now easily refer to as the Georgia system, because the system they run today is the same as it was then. This will be Mike Bobo's second season calling plays in this system, and Carson's second season at the helm behind the wheel of the sports car that is the University of Georgia Bulldogs offense. Now, it's not like they don't have gas in the tank or fun toys on the radio dials to play with. Let's keep in mind what this unit has. If Branson Robinson comes back from his injury and is anything close to 100%, he's going to be a difference maker for Georgia in 2024. But because you can't be certain about that situation, the Dogs decided to get a little insurance, if you will, and bring in Trevor Etienne out of the transfer portal, who will step in as RB1 for Georgia to start the season. He gives the Dogs a big play threat, pass catching ability out of the backfield, and a proven SEC running back. Now, there are other players in that running back room. Actually, that running back room is quite packed, like it's jammed full. The only question is going to be who is going to be able to make the strides to move into that top 3, maybe 4 players that are actually going to see snaps. Speaking of second year in this offense, let's not forget about the wide receivers. Yes, Georgia is losing Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Rosemy Jack-Saint, but they're also bringing back Dominic Lovett, Ra Thomas, Dylan Bell, who, in case you didn't know and weren't paying attention, should absolutely roll into the season in 24 as wide receiver 1 for Carson Beck in this Georgia Bulldogs offense. Arian Smith returns. Anthony Evans, who caught a touchdown in the Orange Bowl, he's back. Tyler Williams. Then you have the young kids, Nitro Tuggle and Sokovie White, who are part of the 2024 recruiting class. If you need a comp for Sokovie White, because he's not a player that everybody might recognize because he wasn't a 5-star or at the top of everyone's recruiting board, just know this. If you're worried about who is going to be able to give Georgia the kind of play on the field that Ladd McConkey provided the Dogs over the last few seasons, I present to you Sokovie White. Very, very elusive and quick, great burst. He can actually change direction at full speed. The thing that made Ladd McConkey so great was his ability to get separation in small space. That is exactly what Sokovie White brings to the Bulldogs. Now, will he be able to get on the field as a freshman? I have no idea. But if you want to know what kind of player he's going to be, that's where you need to look. That sort of player. Now, that's just the wide receivers that were here either last year or as traditional recruits that came in mid-year. They also went to the transfer portal to beef up that wide receiver room, bringing in London Humphrey from Vanderbilt, Colby Young from Miami, and Michael Jackson III from Southern Cal. Those are the top 3. And let's not forget, Oscar Delp is a really good football player, and he's back. That's right. That tight end room that everybody talks about at the University of Georgia, every bit as deep as it was in 2023. Just new names and faces. So you have Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, Pierce Sperlin. Then you have the freshmen, Jaden Riddell, Colton Heinrich. Needless to say, there are weapons everywhere. But what I think is really going to make this offense go, especially early in the year, is the fact that because of several returning players, the Georgia Bulldogs will have one of, if not the best offensive line, not only in the conference, but in the country in 2024. They're only going to have to replace their center. And any learning curve that's there for our new center is going to be erased because he has number 15 standing behind him and taking the snaps every play. So he's going to learn in a hurry. He's already been getting reps. He got reps plenty last season. Certainly he's going to get them in the spring. For the bowl practices, he got plenty of turn. They're going to be just fine at center, but you're still going to have to get used to doing it in game action, right? When the band is playing and the crowds are screaming. But that's where 15, Carson Beck, is going to be worth more than any of us can quantify sitting here tonight. This is one of those things where the defense lost a lot of players off of last year's team. We've already stated that they were not as good as the year before. And there's going to be new faces in new places on the Georgia Bulldogs defense here in 24. That means, assuming we don't have any injuries, that you're going to have a lot of young players seeing their first significant playing time for this unit the first part of the season. And to be quite honest, there are going to be a couple of these true freshmen that were here as mid-year enrollees that are going to be expected to contribute to this team, both on special teams and to provide depth defensively. So just like we talked about in the back half of 24, when you had new faces that were forced into playing on the defensive side of the football and what that looked like on the field, we're probably going to see something very, very similar the first half of the season here in 2024. Extremely talented, but young, and they're going to have to learn in real time facing live fire. So unlike 23, when it was the defense that sort of covered for the offense the first half of the year and carried them until they found their stride, in 24, I see it being just the other way around. I see this veteran offense full of weapons led by Kirby Smart and being called by Mike Bobo as the unit that is going to be able to carry a little extra water that first half of the season and sort of cover the ugly spots for that defense as they learn their way around a brand new unit to start the season. Again, the expectations is this unit is going to be really good, speaking specifically of the defensive side, but they will be young and they will make mistakes. And in some instances, that will show up on the scoreboard. That's where Carson Beck and his unit are going to have to do everything that they need to do to make sure that they are covering for their guys until everybody finds their stride around the middle of the season and the Dogs begin to ramp up toward what we all hope and most of us believe will be a 12-team playoff appearance in the college football playoff in 2024. Now, if everything shakes out right, everybody learns things really quickly and things come together even earlier than maybe I'm expecting and then just get better and better throughout the year. The Dogs are going to be right there with an opportunity to compete for the SEC championship, even in the conference without divisions for the first time since 1992. But it's going to be a fun season, an interesting season, because we aren't going to know exactly what everything looks like when we kick the games off the first game of the year. That's part of the reason why I love college football. That's the reason that coaches love to coach the sport. You want to see these young men grow and learn and mature and become everything that they believe and that you believe they can. So if you really are a fan of college football in its purest form, then the 2024 Georgia Bulldogs are going to be a team that you are going to enjoy watching.
So how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.